Welcome to the second keynote lecture of this CHAM conference. Today we are glad to have with us Tim Cresswell. Tim Cresswell is Ogilvie Professor of Geography at the University of Edinburgh. He is the author or the editor of over a dozen books on the role of space, place, and mobility in social and cultural life. Professor Cresswell has PhDs in geography and creative writing. He is a widely published poet with 3 collections, the most recent Plastiglomerate. His recent academic books include Maxwell Street, Thinking and Writing Place, Moving Towards Transition, and Muybridge and Mobility. And this year, Professor Cresswell published the book The Citizen and the Vagabond, A Politics of Mobility. And The Citizen and the Vagabond is also the title of this lecture that Tim will bring us. But today, on speed, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation and congratulations on a successful conference. It's a very wide, diverse array of people and topics, so it's exciting to see. So I'm going to just get on with this. There we go. I'm not used to sitting down, actually. This is weird. On 23rd of March 2020, I watched with millions of others as Britain's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, announced to the nation that we would enter a period of lockdown in response to the rapid spread of the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 that was causing the disease newly named COVID-19. We were told to stay at home. Workplaces, schools, and all shops deemed non-essential would be closed. People were allowed to leave home for food shopping and for medical reasons, as well as for brief walks close to their homes for the purposes of exercise. With some variations over time, this lockdown would stay in place until the 4th of July. A second lockdown was announced on the 5th of November as the hospitals began to fill up with COVID-19 cases, and it was feared that the National Health Service would be overwhelmed. Before March 2020, I, along with many citizens of the UK, had watched as similar lockdowns have been introduced first in Wuhan, China, and then throughout the world. Lockdowns would continue to be introduced around the world throughout 2020 and 2021. For a brief period following Johnson's announcement, a different world emerged, one that had lain dormant beneath the bustle of everyday life. Photographs and drone videos appeared on social media feeds showing streets that were once choked with traffic suddenly empty and silent. Stories emerged of wildlife once banished appearing in unlikely places. A wild herd of 122 Kashmiri goats took over the town square in Llandudno, Wales. Wild boar took to the streets of Haifa, Israel. And just around the corner from our house in Edinburgh, a deer was photographed strolling down the main road outside Nero's coffee shop. The most regular form of urban mobility, the journey to work and back, ceased to exist for many of us who became used to working from home. The hour we were allowed for a walk became a precious part of our daily life. During these walks, new codes and gestures emerged, thanks to the newly learned practice of social distancing. People began to engage in polite little swerves, accompanied by a knowing nod of the head to acknowledge both each other and the weirdness of the situation. Condensation trails disappeared from the sky as flights were dramatically cut. Global passenger numbers decreased by 60%, a city of 2.5 million people no longer in the air. People began to remark on the possibility of a new normal, as some aspects of the lockdown, in a generally well-to-do place like Edinburgh, seemed appealing. The local city council took the opportunity to reimagine what streets might look like if more space was given over to pedestrians and cyclists. The Spaces for People initiative saw sidewalks widened, areas of road marked off with bollards and cones, and whole streets given over to pedestrians. Bus lanes that had previously been designated for rush hour only became all-day bus lanes. Elsewhere in Europe, street spaces were re-engineered to take account of this new normal. In Milan, for instance, 22 miles of street space is reallocated from cars to pedestrians and cyclists. The plan was not simply to recognise the realities of mobility patterns under lockdown, but to change them permanently in what had traditionally been a congested city with high levels of air pollution. The deputy mayor of Milan, Marco Grinelli, said that, in his words, "We worked for years to reduce car use. If everybody drives a car, there's no space for people. There's no space to move. There's no space for commercial activities outside the shops. Of course we want to reopen the economy, but we think we should do it on a different basis from before. We think we have to reimagine Milan in the new situation. We have to get ready. That's why it's so important to defend even a part of the economy, to support bars, artisans, and restaurants. When it's over, the cities that still have this kind of economy will have an advantage, and Milan wants to be in that category." Those are his words. Back in the UK, the government decided that people without homes should be provided with shelter, paid for by the government. The unhoused were taken off the streets and taken to hotels that no longer had any tourists to service. One of the most remarkable of the many remarkable visualizations that appeared in the media in the early days of the pandemic was a map from NASA showing the incredible lowering of air pollution over the Wuhan area since the onset of the stringent lockdown there. The shrinking red blob represented a 63% reduction in nitrogen oxide concentrations, which itself may have prevented over 10,000 premature deaths across China in April 2020. The strange new normal revealed that it was possible to accomplish when the global community was faced with a crisis. Roads could be reclaimed for people, air travel could be slashed, pollution and its attendant health problems could be eradicated, seemingly overnight. The unhoused could be provided with shelter. It led some of us to wonder why other crises had not been tackled with such urgency. There was, as Mimi Scheller has shown, a climate crisis, an urbanisation crisis, and a refugee crisis, all entangled and implicated in each other. Each was likely to kill far more people than the COVID crisis, and yet governments have not reached with anywhere near the urgency to any of these in the same way. Perhaps the COVID crisis could show exactly what governments are capable of. Alongside the strangely utopian moments of the pandemic, though, other uglier aspects started to become clear. Those of us who could work from home were serviced by a workforce, often in the gig economy and precariously employed in zero-hour contracts, who could not stay at home. For me and people like me to be comfortably immobilised, an army of workers had to be frantically on the move. Demographically, the people servicing my stay-at-home existence were quite different. Many were people of colour. This was also true of the healthcare and social care workers who worked in the most dangerous environments. At the same time, stories emerged of the super wealthy getting in their private jets and heading for island homes or escape bunkers in order to bypass both the virus and the lockdown rules. The reason unhoused people were suddenly provided places to stay was not for their own benefit, but to stop the spread of the disease to those of us who had homes. They had become a public health risk. Elsewhere in the world, the efficacy of lockdowns was even more questionable. In India, a lockdown was imposed overnight on a population of over 1 billion. There was no way to socially distance on the outskirts of massive cities. Hundreds of thousands of migrant and casual workers were asked to return home when home was hundreds of miles away and there was suddenly no transport. In any case, more people were dying from tuberculosis and other persistent diseases of poverty. Refugees in camps on the Greek island of Lesbos remained crowded into camps with only a few standpipes as sources of water. In the United States, Trump's administration layered a fear of COVID onto a generalized fear of immigrants to further clamp down on the US-Mexico border, as well as to feed xenophobia through references to the China or Wuhan virus. In the fall semester of 2020, I was teaching my Geographies of Mobility course, and it quickly became evident to the students that almost everything we were discussing in the course was being illustrated in real time across the world in COVID-related ways. The course, like many others, became a COVID course in more ways than one. The pandemic was one massive teachable moment. At local, national and global levels, while lockdowns made clear the possibility of other, better worlds, they also revealed the persistence of the importance of mobility to the production and maintenance of social hierarchies. They underlined the importance of the politics of mobility, to our understanding processes of power. It's exactly this theme that is at the heart of my recent book, The Citizen and the Vagabond, A Politics of Mobility, which has just come out from the University of Minnesota Press. The book develops some key ideas for a meso-theoretical approach to the politics of mobility. Strategically, it uses ideas from other theorists and a variety of real-world examples. Methodologically, it moves quickly between examples and concepts that I have found helpful in building an approach to mobility that can be applied in a broad array of contexts, including but not limited to the traditional realms of transport studies, for instance, or migration studies at another scale. It does not subscribe to a singular theoretical model, but seeks to contribute to the development of a geographical theoretical approach to mobility. While the book is informed and inspired by a range of theoretical approaches, including phenomenology, post-structuralism, feminism, Marxism, and critical race theory, it's not a coherent example of any of them. What I hope it is instead is a coherent example of a more than geographical theory construction, making an argument for the importance of a more than geographical phenomenon, mobility, in understanding how social and cultural hierarchies are produced, reproduced, and occasionally transformed. Like the theoretical and conceptual literatures I have drawn on, the examples and illustrations I have chosen are deliberately diverse, ranging from the deep history of vagabondage in medieval Europe to the development of the rules of American football, from the movies of Charlie Chaplin to the stranded diamond princess quarantined in Yokohama Harbor due to COVID. The diversity includes a range of scales, from the allegedly furtive movements of black bodies being stopped and searched on the streets of New York City, to the journeys of migrants from Central Africa across the Mediterranean. I wantonly mix up scales to show how the themes of speed or rhythm, for instance, transcend the academic and theoretical silos that different forms of mobility are normally placed in. The diversity of examples is also temporally diverse. There's a temptation within the new mobilities paradigm to focus on the new. To counter that, I've ranged across history to trace how particular patterns of movement, meaning, and practice, or what I call constellations of mobility, emerge, dissolve, and re-emerge through space and time, so the mobile past continues to be present in the present. This is how an archaic term such as vagabond continues to play a role in the diagnosis of contemporary and future mobilities. It's important, I suggest, to continue to investigate the past in order to understand the world we currently move through, as well as the worlds we will traverse in the future. This book then is part of an ongoing process of meso-theoretical construction and is a continuation and development of arguments I've been making throughout my career, starting with In Place, Out of Place, Geography, Ideology and Transgression in 1996, which developed an account of the role of place in the constitution of the normative, and at the same time an account of the role of transgression, often in the form of mobility, in transforming spatial doxa into openly debated orthodoxy. This was followed by The Tramp in America in 2001, which took a deep dive into the role of geographical imaginations around mobility in forms of knowledge ranging from vaudeville comedy to documentary photography, sociology to eugenics, all of which played a role in the constitution of the figure of the tramp in the United States between the Civil War and World War II. The theme of mobility was developed most fully in On the Move, Mobility in the Modern West, in which I more fully developed an approach to mobility through detailed case studies, including ballroom dancing, model kitchen design, workplace regulation, and the design and use of Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. In my 2019 book, Maxwell Street, Writing and Thinking Place, I explored the interactions of place and mobility, and knowledges and imaginations of and about places and mobility, as they were assembled in one specific location, the area around the intersection of Maxwell and Halsted, just west and south of Chicago's downtown loop. As with my other books, the empirical material used to make my case was deliberately eclectic, ranging from city planning documents to street photography, blues songs to tax increment financing policy. The Citizen and the Vagabond then is the latest chapter in a series of works that have insisted on the centrality of geographical imaginations around mobility but also place in the constitution of forms of social and cultural hierarchy that are systematically asymmetrical. I refer to this long-term project as critical geosophy, a phrase that borrows from American geographer John Kirkland Wright's call for the study of how people in all walks of life know and imagine the worlds around them. To his formulation of geosophy, I've added the word critical to signify my interest in how these forms of knowledge and imagination play roles in the worlds of power, how the geographical knowledge and imagination of a judge or a doctor or a sociologist has a different purchase on the world than that of an undocumented migrant or a gig economy delivery driver. Geographical knowledge and imagination, I argue, are central elements in the creation of a continuum linking the worlds of citizens to the worlds of vagabonds, the two figures I used to think with in the new project. So following an introduction to the figures of the citizen and the vagabond, the book is structured around 5 themes or aspects of mobility, including routes and routing, speed, rhythm, friction, and turbulence. And today I'm going to give you a compressed version of the chapter on speed. But first I'm going to get a glass of water. Because as you'll see, I won't have a chance to do that again. Okay, here we go. Speed or velocity is a measure of time and space. It's a measure of how much distance can be covered in a set period of time, most commonly recorded as miles per hour. Speed, however, is much more than a measure. It's an attribute of all forms of mobility that have been used as the basis of stories and philosophies and as a means of differentiating people and things in hierarchical ways. The history of the world can be told as a history of velocity. Up until the invention of the steam engine at the beginning of the 19th century, humans were limited to velocities provided by nature, the speed of wind, currents, horses, and for most people, their own bodies. Between 1800 and 1970, a period coincident with the rise of CO2 emissions associated with anthropogenic global warming, humans moved from the capacity to travel at around 30 miles per hour on horseback to the 24,816 miles per hour experienced by the crew of Apollo 10 in May 1969. It's little surprise that the speed was often associated with the promise of modernity. Visions of the future were often visions of ever faster travel. The expectations of speed were registered or experienced, were factored into design. Even when no actual increase in speed was registered or expected, streamlining was all the rage in the Art Deco line styling of cars and architecture and furniture in the 1930s, and became an inspiration for everything from women's hats to lemon presses. By 1970, the speed at which humans could travel ceased to increase. In terms of corporeal mobility, at least, the age of acceleration was over. The Apollo 10 mission was complete, and for non-astronauts who were wealthy, Concorde had made its first test flight in 1969 and would become available for supersonic travel over long distances in 1976. Advertisements for the new airliner sold it as a time machine and noted that now there's a super flight, and the world's a smaller place. Speed was connected to other luxuries. Rolex watches jumped on the bandwagon, declaring, if you're flying the Concorde tomorrow, you'll be wearing a Rolex. When Concorde ceased operations in November 2003 following a fatal crash in Paris, it was the first time that speed for paying customers, as opposed to fighter pilots or astronauts, decelerated since the first steam engine, with paying customers in 1825. Paid-for speed increased again in the 21st century with the advent of commercial space travel, as today's billionaires supplemented previous investments in very tall buildings with even more investments in faster vehicles that could take paying passengers briefly into outer space. It's not surprising, therefore, that speed has been at the centre of much excited commentary about how the world has been changing since the advent of mechanised transport. In the late 19th century, the American physician George Beard created the diagnosis of neurasthenia to describe a kind of widespread nervous exhaustion created by, among other things, the advent of steam power and clock time. The sociologist Jörg Simmel looked to the sped-up and time-specific activity of the 19th century metropolis to account for the adoption of the metropolitan blasé attitude to insulate citizens from the accelerating world. In an essay with the title Life at High Pressure, one late 19th century observer wrote, "Beyond doubt, the most salient characteristic of life in this latter portion of the 19th century is its speed. what we may call its hurry, the rate at which we move, the high pressure at which we work. And the question to be considered is, first, whether this rapid rate is in itself a good, and next, whether it's worth the price we pay for it, a price reckoned up and not very easy thoroughly to ascertain. Does that sound familiar? Speed has always had its advocates as well as its detractors. Speed, for instance, was central to the proto-fascist manifestos of the Italian futurists, with Marinetti declaring, "We affirm that the beauty of the world has been enriched by a new form of beauty, the beauty of speed." In the 1909 founding and manifesto of futurism, Aldous Huxley, writing in 1931, was also a speed fan, writing that speed, it seems to me, provides the one genuinely modern pleasure. True, men have always enjoyed speed, but their enjoyment has been limited until very recent times by the capacities of the horse, whose maximum velocity is not much more than 30 miles per hour. Most of the excited commentary on worlds of increasing speed, whether positive or negative, have been generalized diagnoses of the costs or benefits of speeding up. What I focus on here is how speed is differentiated and distributed, how, in consort with routing, rhythm, and friction, it forms a politics of mobility. I explore how the pacing of lives and social relations is intimately bound up with geometries of power, as Amit and Salazar have written, how some people's speed is linked to the slowness or stillness of others. One starting point for this association of high speed with luxury and privilege, as seen in the association between Concorde and Rolex watches, as well as American Express and other accoutrements of the wealthy. We do not have to turn to the rarefied world of supersonic flight, however, to see the politics of speed in operation. Speed is also a familiar axis along which forms of privilege are arranged on 21st century planet Earth. We see it, for instance, in the airports. In airports I'm familiar with, there's a fast track. It's usually accessible to customers with first or business class tickets, or perhaps members of elite levels of frequent flyer schemes. In Edinburgh Airport, Fast Track is advertised in the following way. Our Fast Track option can speed up your journey through security by bypassing the queues and helping you get to the front of the line quicker. Of course, we always work hard to minimize queues in the airport and ensure things are moving as smoothly as possible. However, in busy environments, queues can be inevitable, and that's where Fast Track comes in. In addition to accessing Fast Track by buying a more expensive ticket, you can also access it by paying for airport parking or simply buying a Fast Track pass. If you use Fast Track, you enter a separate door in the terminal, follow several corridors, and find yourself magically at a gate into the security area, having bypassed the snaking queues of everyday non-Fast Track passengers waiting to unload their laptops and unbuckle their belts. It's a passage through space that gets you to the gate or lounge more quickly. For part of the process, you walk relatively quickly past the more or less stationary lines of regular passengers. It's this kind of distribution of corporeal mobility I want to focus on here. There are, of course, other purely temporal forms of speed that are also linked to privilege. I'm thinking, for instance, of high-speed internet services that also divide the world into relatively privileged people who have it and those who do not. The speed of objects is also distributed in ways that also distribute privilege between people. We pay more, if we can, for faster delivery. Companies like Amazon sell delivery speed as a privilege. The link between speed, privilege, and decreasing freedom for many was made by the theologian and philosopher Ivan Illich in his 1974 book, Energy and Equity. Here, Illich makes a case for a politics of mobility based on the capacities of able-bodied humans. His argument was that well-being in general should be based on the lowest possible use of energy by the affluent in society. A ceiling on energy use, he argued, would be linked to a likelihood of equity. The main way he talks about energy is using the speed of traffic. In traffic, he writes, energy used over a specific period of time, power, translates into speed. In this case, the critical quantum will appear as a speed limit. Whatever this limit has been passed, the basic pattern of social degradation by high energy quanta has emerged. Once some public utility went faster than 15 miles per hour, equity declined and scarcity at both time and space increased. Motorised transportation monopolised traffic and blocked self-powered transit. In every Western country, passenger mileage of all types of conveyance increased by a factor of 100 within 50 years of building the first railroad. Illich makes the important point that speed is a relational achievement. The capacity of some to move faster is often realised at the expense of others who are forced to slow down. Speed and equity are linked at the hip. As speed increases, people become excluded from their own capacity to move, or active transport, and become captive to powered vehicles and their velocities. In Canadian philosopher Mark Kingwell's terms, we become velocitised, in the same way we tend to drive at the ambient speed of traffic when we're on a motorway. In the terms of fast track, the infrastructure provided for the elite to move quickly is related to the speeds of those in the slow lane, both in terms of the space taken up and the staffing required. More generally, we can think of the relationship between city space provided for people in cars and that provided for cyclists and pedestrians. Increasing the speed of motorists decreases the speed of others and makes their mobilities more precarious. Illich's argument that equity ceases to be possible once humans travel at speeds faster than that which is possible on a bicycle. A true choice among political systems and desirable social relations, he writes, is possible only when speed is restricted. Participatory democracy demands low energy technology, and free people must travel the road to productive social relations at the speed of a bicycle. To Illich, people on their feet are more or less equal, and any increase in speed beyond that inherently involves an infringement on the freedom of movement. Beyond a certain velocity, he writes, passengers become consumers of other people's time, and accelerating vehicles become the means for effecting a net transfer of lifetime. When public space is shared between cars, bicycles, and pedestrians, the politics of speed becomes a matter of life and death. According to the National Safety Council in the United States, speeding was partly responsible for 29% of all traffic fatalities in 2020, a total of over 30 people per day. According to the British organisation Roadwise, at a speed of 35 miles per hour, there's a 50% chance that a pedestrian will be killed in a collision. At 40 miles per hour, the figure becomes 90%. Speed is deadly and relational. The faster the traffic, the less safe the space becomes for those not in motorised vehicles. In March 2023, the devolved government of Wales reduced the default speed limits for built-up areas from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. Reducing accidents involving pedestrians was a significant reason for the cut in the speed limit, but not the only one. By reducing the speed of traffic, it was argued that forms of active travel like walking, running, and cycling would become safer and therefore more appealing. This in turn would lead to increased social interaction, as more people would encounter each other in public space and build community in the process. Physical and mental health outcomes would improve thanks to the increase in exercise outdoors. Local economies would also improve due to increased footfall on high streets. A decrease in car use for local trips might also lead to a reduction in carbon emissions from travel. The nationwide decrease in default speed limits was based on monitoring in 7 test sites across Wales, where a number of positive effects have been recorded, including a significant increase in the use of active travel as a way of getting to primary schools. Parents felt that the new speed limit made the use of space safer for them and their children. In the United States, traffic speed is also spatially differentiated in ways that contribute to racial inequity. An analysis of pedestrian fatalities in Oregon, for instance, concluded that people of colour experience a disproportionate fatal injury burden, with black people experiencing the greatest disparity. The next greatest disparity was found among American Indian and Alaskan Native peoples, followed by Latinx people. Asian people also had a higher rate of pedestrian injury than the state average. An analysis of pedestrian deaths and race at the level of census tract revealed that, in their terms, in places where low-income populations and people of colour are more concentrated, there are measurably higher levels of vehicle traffic and higher speed arterials. People in those communities walk, take transit and bicycle to work at higher rates than communities with fewer low-income people and people of colour. In addition to this work travel behaviour, Communities with a greater concentration of poverty and people of colour have more transit stops, are likely to use transit for non-work travel more than communities with fewer transit stops. Combined, the higher walking activity in areas with more traffic moving at higher speeds is likely precipitating the pedestrian fatal injury rate disparity between tracks. That's all their words. We can see how questions of speed are also questions of what Mimi Scheller calls mobility justice. The relatively fast speed of some has externalities, which are related to the comparatively slow speed of others, or in some instances, death. The children who might walk to school in Wales, or people of colour in Oregon, have mobility capacities which are directly and indirectly related to the speed of people in cars. The same logic occurs at other scales. If I choose to fly to Paris from Edinburgh because it will get me there quicker than travelling by train, then I will emit 437 kilograms of CO2 rather than the 46 kilograms I would have emitted on the train. I would save some time, of course, due to the speed of planes versus trains. Speed is the main reason people choose to fly rather than travel by train. But my decision impacts the lives of people who are not able to, or choose not to, make that choice. The impacts of global warming that result from carbon emissions of flights to Paris are experienced first and foremost by the world's poor, far from where I live in Edinburgh. The scale of Oregon's urban space and at the scale of the globe, subject to global heating, speed is part of what Ruth Wilson Gilmore terms a definition of racism, that is, the state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. Illich's evocation of 15 miles per hour as a maximum speed for equity reflects current investments in a different kind of speed, slowness. While high speeds have frequently been associated with luxury and elite status, the same can be said for slow speeds. Consider Charlie Chaplin's 1936 movie Modern Times. Chaplin's movie is an exemplary allegory for the wider politics of mobility, both in the 1930s and in the present day. Most obvious, perhaps, is his evocation of the ways the rhythms of the assembly line and the wider capitalist logic behind the assembly line become part of the bodies of workers who worked along the line. Chaplin's little tramp character cannot stop jerking furiously once his body becomes disconnected from its role of tightening bolts on some unspecified piece of machinery. In a desperate attempt to meet the requirements of the job, the little tramp is swallowed up by the assembly line, and we see his body moving among the cogs of the machine. Later, as the tramp is driven crazy by the requirements of capital, his machine-like body turns into that of a ballet dancer, countering necessity with demented carnivalesque pleasure. Among the clash of bodily and imposed rhythms, however, there's also a politics of speed. The little tramp's body cannot keep up with the speed required by the machine and capital. At several moments, we see the factory boss demanding more speed over a prophetic video screen system. In each case, the assembly line speeds up and the repeated movements of the workers follow suit. Notably, the boss is shown sitting in his office, reading the paper and doing a jigsaw puzzle between his commands for speed.
Section 5, speeder up, fall 1.
The politics of speed in modern times reverses the idea of speed as luxury. Speed is something that is a constant object of struggle in capitalist society, but it's not just a desire for more speed that's at stake. Rather, it's capacity to self-regulate speed that's struggled over. For many, the requirements of capital demand inhuman fast mobilities as part of working life. In Chaplin's time, it was the production line technology that transferred the velocity requirements of capital to the individual worker's body. Today, it's a different assemblage of technologies at work. We can think, for instance, of the pickers' bodies in Amazon warehouses, or the bodies of delivery drivers acting out their roles as key workers during the COVID lockdowns. Amazon's work practices closely mirror the experience of the little tramp, using technologies that fuse workers' bodies with technologies at the level of the individual. Geographer and social justice organiser Mustafa Henaway signed up to work at an Amazon delivery station near Montreal. He describes repetitive jobs that take place at breakneck speed while merged with technology in a way that turns workers into semi-robots over 10-hour shifts. Each worker would strap a device called a TCI device to their arm, and this would then control their actions throughout the day. In his words, We'd log our device, Holloway writes, and from that moment on, no longer be in control of our actions. Instead, the device would determine where we would go, what tasks we would be doing, and how good an employee we were. Holloway's job involved processing 300 items an hour to ensure they moved from the truck they arrived on onto a conveyor belt, and then onto a shelving system before being placed into appropriately sized bags to be delivered. All the time, he was monitored and directed by the device he was connected to and watched by a sinister AI camera put there allegedly to ensure worker safety. Holloway describes the impact of the expected speed of work on the workers. Again, in his words, the expectation of every worker was to hit 300 items per hour for the entirety of the shift. Working with such speed with various items ranging from books, cat litter, barbecues, and even large ergonomic chairs for people who are now working from home and needed them, created immense pressure. Of course, we were told constantly to move things safely, that our health was a priority, never to run, never to lift items too heavy. But these recommendations began to feel like a joke, because the bottom line was that our rates were everything. If we became too slow, boxes would pile up rapidly and cause a nightmare at the end of the line. According to my calculations, keeping on top of it meant moving a box about every 6 to 8 seconds. Holloway's experience provides much needed insight into how speed has become part of the everyday lives of those who make capitalism work, often to benefit those of us who can take our time. One thing that modern times shows us is that the act of taking our time is often every bit as much a privilege as speed can be. This has been noted, for instance, by geographer Nigel Thrift when he refers to mobility as a structure of feeling, a generalised sense of a new present based on the increasing importance of machines and the machinic in everyday life. He notes how walking became a popular pastime for the relatively well-to-do in England, just at the moment that steam trains made it possible to reach places like the Lake District in relative comfort and without great expenditures of time. Walking only became popular once it was not compulsory. To enjoy its relatively slow pace, much faster speeds were necessary. Being fast and being slow are often structurally related in this way. The ability for reasonably well-off people to slow down during COVID lockdowns in developed nations was dependent on the ability of others to keep up their speed or even increase it. Amazon's profits grew significantly during lockdown, which meant that workers like Holloway were working flat out. Many of us started to order groceries and meals through delivery systems like Deliveroo. Whole armies of people were relabeled key workers were busier than ever. It's only possible to stay at home and slow down if others can speed up. Recent years have seen the promotion of all things slow food, slow culture, slow cities. When the sociologist Hartmut Rosa looked for an antidote to the problem of acceleration and its attendant pathologies, he turned to resonance. Capitalist society, according to Rosa, forces us into worlds of incessant speed and growth, which leads to permanent and increasing levels of stress, very similar to George Beard in the 19th century. The movements when we escape the culture of acceleration are, according to his arguments, moments when we resonate with the world in ways that are non-instrumental. Slowness, he argues, cannot be an end in itself. Nothing is gained if the fire engine simply slows down. A slow internet connection is just a nuisance, and a slow roller coaster is not exciting at all. Thus, when people dream of deceleration, what they in fact mean is a different mode of being in the world and relating to the world. What they really want is a chance to get into resonance with people, things, and places. They do not want deceleration. Speed is only bad when it leads to alienation, that is, to the loss of our capacity to truly appropriate the world. Despite his insistence that slowness in and of itself is not the solution to the pathologies of acceleration, his examples of resonance include things like a walk in a forest, reading a book, or spending time with art, most of which require significant deceleration from the ambient pace of the world. I'm now in the wrong page. Just 1 second, there we go. The international organisation Cheetah Slow Slowtown was founded in Italy in 1999 and currently boasts 248 member towns of less than 50,000 people. It's based on the success of the slow food movement and expanded the focus from food to all aspects of life in small towns. The Cheetah Slow Manifesto traces a rudimentary history of humanity, starting with the necessities of food and shelter and the founding of settlements until, in their words, finally the time of the machines came with their increasing hectic, frenetic rhythms of life, leading to the need for a new old kind of living proposed by Cheetah Slow. So this is their words, what that means. Towns animated by people curious about time reclaimed, rich in squares, theatres, workshops, cafes, restaurants, spiritual places, unspoilt landscapes and fascinating craftsmen, where we still appreciate the slow, benevolent succession of the seasons, with their rhythm of authentic products, respecting fine flavours and health, the spontaneity of their rituals, the fascination of living traditions. There is a joy of the slow, quiet, reflective way of life. The proper pace of a good life, according to the advocates of all things slow, is a pace that allows and even encourages connections to nature, a pace that allows mindfulness, authenticity, wellness. Carl Honoré is one of the leading evangelists for the cult of slowness. His book, In Praise of Slow, is just the latest in the long line of screeds diagnosing the negative consequences of speed and advocating for a slowing down of everything from food to travel to sex. Despite Cassandra-like mutterings from the speed merchants, Honoré writes, slower, it turns out, often means better. Better health, better work, better exercise, better family life, better business, better cuisines, and better sex. Honoré argues that we should seek to live at what musicians call the tempo giusto, the right speed. He interviews Carlo Petrini, the founder of the Italian slow food movement, who makes the same point. Being slow means that you control the rhythms of your own life, Petrini says. If today I want to go fast, I go fast. If tomorrow I want to go slow, I go slow. What we are fighting for is the right to determine our own tempos. While this is certainly an appealing notion and one that would certainly appeal to Charlie Chaplin's Diddle Tramp, it's equally clearly linked to relative privilege in much the same way as travelling on Concorde is. As John Tomlinson has put in relation to Cheetah Slow, in John Tomlinson's words, Cheetah Slow, in promoting the development of small towns of 50,000 inhabitants or less, represents the interests of a particular spatial cultural constituency and related localised forms of capital. In a sense then, and without being unduly cynical, Cheetah Slow could be seen as defending enclaves of interest rather than offering plausible models for more general social transformation. Tomlinson's observation is a reminder that we cannot straightforwardly equate particular velocities, fast or slow, with either freedom or its lack. Neither high speeds nor slowness are good or bad in themselves. While normative life worlds have been created around being fast or slow, it's not a particular velocity that will bring happiness, self-actualization, or justice. The focus instead should be on both the relations between speed and slowness and the capacities for individuals to have autonomy over their own velocities. It's also important to keep the relational nature of speed in mind. Speed or slowness may feel emancipatory on an individual level, but be systematically linked to speeds for others which are imposed rather than chosen. Like Charlie Chaplin's Tramp or the patient passenger standing in the slow lane of Edinburgh's airport. Finally, speed does not stand on its own. It's one aspect of a more general account of mobilities and their role in the creation, maintenance, and transformation of social and cultural hierarchies. Speed is intertwined with rhythm, routes, and friction. Getting through security using fast track is not simply a matter of moving at a faster speed. It also involves taking a separate route that has been carved out of space to facilitate speedy passengers through the airport. Chaplin's Little Tramp was not told to speed up, but was forced to internalise a different rhythm, the rhythms of machine-aided capital. An analysis of the politics of speed, then, is but one dimension of an account of the politics of mobility.